maybe start telling us a little bit about levees.org.
The mission of the organization was to get the truth out about why New Orleans flooded in those weeks and months and years, actually, after the flooding. The narrative was, oh, monster storm, nothing could be done. And beside, those people in New Orleans deserved it. They deserved what they got. And I couldn't live with that. Couldn't bear it.
There was a sentiment. I was halfway through law school when it happened. I was in my second year. And there was this concept where people were like, well, you're below sea level. As if like, well, yeah, you live in California and it's dry there. So I guess tell us maybe more about the mission then and what we're doing now. Because now it's 20 years later.
So we just celebrated or commemorated is a better word, the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And I got asked all the time, what does that mean? Well, to me, it means the day that a moderately wet, moderately windy storm hit New Orleans and exposed engineering failures that would have been exposed maybe by Rita or maybe by the next storm, maybe by Ida. Bound to be exposed. And that happened August 29, 2005. And we need to get the word out that this was engineering failure.
Welcome to Above the Legal Limit. I'm your host, Justin Chopin, business owner, lawyer, dad, world's best husband, traveler, and adventure seeker. On this podcast, we mix business with pleasure. We'll dive into growth strategies, entrepreneurial adventures, the business of law, and prove that business isn't boring. So let's get ready because we are going above the legal limit. Welcome to Above the Legal Limit. I have very special guests today. Sandy Rosenthal, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Great to be here.
So you are with levees.org, and I see you are also a published author for Words Whispered in the Water. So what we're going to talk about is, it's been 20 years? No, 15 years. I'm trying to remember. Help me out. No, it's 20 years, 2005. My goodness. Katrina, right? So that's what, levees.org. Why don't you maybe start telling us a little bit about levees.org?
Well, of course, the mission of the organization was to get the truth out about why New Orleans flooded in those weeks and months and years, actually, after the flooding. The narrative was, oh, monster storm, nothing could be done. And beside, those people in New Orleans deserved it. They deserved what they got. And I couldn't live with that. Couldn't bear it.
There was a sentiment. So I was halfway through law school when it happened. I was in my second year. And there was this concept where people were like, well, you're below sea level. Right? As if like, well, yeah, you live in California and it's dry there. And by the way, I forgot to say this. If you're hearing all this sound in the background, it's because or you see like, hey, Justin, you're not in a sterile conference room. We're not in my office. We're doing something different today. We are at The Bell, new restaurant pub that just opened in New Orleans on Esplanade. So if you're watching this and you're like, man, I need a proper pint or some fishmonger's pie, come on over to The Bell, where we are, and they've been very gracious to host us. And so this is fun, something new. So if you hear clanking and about, that's because we're not in a law office where we tell everyone to shush. We're in a restaurant. But so I remember, there was a sentiment like what, New Orleans deserved it because that's, we're below sea level. And I say this, look, my kids don't know, but we live in Lakeview. The house that, we built was in 2005 under, who knows? I don't know how much, 10 feet of water. So I guess tell us maybe more about the mission then and what we're doing now, because now it's 20 years later. But I don't think your work is done yet. And if you're reading headlines, it certainly seems like it's not done. So what's levees.org doing now?
Sure, I'm be delighted to tell you. So we just celebrated or commemorated is a better word, the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And I got asked all the time, what does that mean? Well, to me, it means the day that a moderately wet, moderately windy storm hit New Orleans and exposed engineering failures that would have been exposed maybe by Rita or maybe by the next storm, maybe by Ida. But they were bound to be exposed. And that happened August 29, 2005. And we need to get the word out that this was engineering failure. And as to what we're doing right now, we want for every single student studying for their engineer's bachelor's degree to receive instruction on failures and lessons learned. Because right now, that is not standard procedure at the 200 plus schools.
Wow. Well, I was here. I remember it. I was sleeping on a friend's couch in Houston because I didn't really have any place to go because I was like a law student. And I remember flipping on the TV and being completely perplexed when I woke up the next morning and the cameras started rolling that New Orleans was totally underwater. The initial thought was like, oh God, that must have been some hurricane. And it was, not to discredit Katrina entirely, but if you look, when it made landfall, it was not the strongest hurricane to hit New Orleans. Now, when it was in the Gulf, it was, a demon.
And
but,
what hit
but it
Mississippi?
did weaken, and it destroyed Mississippi too, right? But what would it have been like had it been maybe a Camille, right? Where I think is still probably the strongest hurricane to hit. We don't know, thank God. But yeah, so I remember flipping on the TV, and we just assumed it was like, oh, so much water had come in from the hurricane that it destroyed New Orleans, but it really wasn't. It wasn't so. And of course, now from a lawyer's perspective, right? I remember the class action litigation, in Ray, levies. But I don't actually remember, as I sit here today, what the final outcome. My thought was that it was unsuccessful, as I recall.
It was dismissed.
It was
because
okay.
the Army Corps of Engineers, the people responsible for the design and construction of those levees, they could not be held liable for financial damages because of the Flood Control Act of 1928. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it took years to get to that point. That wasn't determined until 2013 after multiple appeals.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, in Ray levee breach. Sure. So, well, and here we are. And recent headlines are that our new levees, or our new and improved levees, are actually sinking again. And so, you have to kind of wonder, how safe are our communities? Like, is Lakeview a safe place to raise a family right now for the levees purposes, not the coyotes and drug crime? I just only talking about levees.
For your listeners, they need to know that the new levees built after Hurricane Katrina, they have something called resilience built into them. So if water overflows them, yes, it's true, some of them are sinking, but should water overtop them, mm-hmm. they're not going to just wholesale buckle and fall apart like they did 20 years ago. They have all kinds of things. They've got riprap on them. They've got cement splash pads, if you will. The levees they mixed dirt with cement and pumped it back into the levees. And I could go on and on with the changes that have been done. The new system is a good one. However, it comes at the expense of almost 1,400 lives.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. And for those of us that lived through it, I mean, everybody remembers, I remember hearing the stories of I was very fortunate. I truly lost nothing in Katrina but time. And when you're in your 20s, you have an abundance of that. So it wasn't an issue, but so many of us lost so much, either financially or loved ones. Certainly 1,400 people lost everything. And so, this year was a landmark year. And I always think, look, Katrina now is not a distant memory, but it is a memory now. But for a very long time, I remember coming back and them saying, New Orleans may not be back for 10 years. And I remember thinking, 10 years? Oh my God, that's impossible. And I think that they were wrong. It wasn't 10 years. It was much longer than that. And I mean, if you go drive in the 9th Ward and ask me if the lower 9th Ward is back, is it?
You don't have to go that far.
Right.
Here we are at
it's true. You can go to Lakeview and look at all the empty lots.
You can look in Lakeview, and you can also look in the Gentilly region of New Orleans.
That's true too.
And the lower 9th Ward, not that far, but for us here on Esplanade Avenue, it's a very short distance, and you'll still see homes with the X's on them.
Right. Yes. For a long time, we were talking about this. A lot of the people in my firm are younger. And, Katrina to them is truly a distant memory. It's like this thing that happened when they were little kids. And we were all talking about our experiences and leaving and coming back. And one of the things that really stuck with me was just how gross New Orleans was when we got back. There was like, you know, an inch and a half of white ash, you know, on the ground, and the flies were like coming through the pipes, which I guess, you know, we called them then were like coffin flies. I don't know one fly from another. I don't really care. You know, it was gross.
And in the early days, there weren't even any flies.
Right.
It was quiet. It was gray and quiet. Not a cricket, not a sound. I drove back here in early November because I was trying to get levees.org started. And I came into town to scope for a place to hold our kickoff rally. And I didn't bring my dog with me, and I regretted it, not because I felt unsafe. It was just so strange and eerie and haunting to be in a city with no life.
Right. You know, I always noticed, and this is one that'll last for generations, how much brighter New Orleans was afterwards. The oak trees. So, I mean, people don't even realize how many of those beautiful century-old plus, you know, oak trees were just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, St. Charles Avenue, I was talking about this. St. Charles Avenue didn't used to look like that. There was a canopy of oak trees for miles. It'll never be back. They didn't even replant those oak trees, you know.
Oak trees don't like briny salt water.
Yeah.
And the magnolias, if they looked at the salt water, they died. Mm-hmm. But the cypresses are very happy.
they seem to
there's one right out the door, doing just having a good time.
So, well, hey, I think that's awesome. I didn't realize you had started levees.org, and so thank you, because look, we were talking about this earlier. If you're not going to put yourself out there, no one's going to come to you, and to affect change means you have to be willing to do something,
to open up your mouth
about change. And expect it to happen. Mm-hmm. You can only act and force change if you want that. And so I remember, you know, people talked about, well, New Orleans is just going to have a smaller footprint, you know, or like it's just going to have to give up, you know, we'll just have to give up New Orleans East. I remember someone saying like, oh yeah, we'll just have to be the sliver by the river and then everything else can go. And I remember thinking, what a stupid thing to say. You know, we were 500,000 people, more or less, and maybe then, you know, not now, but, you know, certainly in the GNO. You're just going to walk away? Why? Because, you know, lower lying parishes, you know, why don't we fix the problem? And you know, there was a lot of discussion as to how we were going to construct the levees, right? Holland has some very cool ideas. I don't know if we adopted portions of it, but I remember reading them. It's fascinating to look at what Holland has been able to come up with.
I actually went to Holland as an invited guest, congressional delegation, and we saw the amazing thing that Holland is doing. You realize the whole country is below sea level. So they have to pay attention to sea level rise and these things. Well, I do have to share with you that the Army Corps of Engineers listened but didn't take any of their advice and built their levees the way they wanted to. They also didn't listen to the levee boards after Katrina, who were created to work with the Corps. The Army Corps of Engineers are our way or the highway, and you may quote me. However, they did build a good system. They did do something good with that $16 billion.
Well, I mean, we're appreciative, I suppose, of anything you can do for us. Maybe we could get them in here to fix our sewage and water board infrastructure. I would be, you know, given the amount of taxes we paid last year, I figure I'm good for a portion of that. But, you know, I think, you know, when we talk about our crumbling infrastructure, I don't know that we could have anything less than maybe, you know, the federal government coming in and just ripping up streets and starting over again.
I wouldn't advocate for that.
No, I probably not. You know, but you know, hey, you know, the levees, as you say, like they are better, right? So I remember afterwards the levee districts, they kind of took a little bit of a bad rap. Like they were, you know,
they were thrown under the bus.
Yeah, it was the scapegoat. It was like, oh well, that's the problem. You've got all these levee districts, and they're all, you know, independent, and they're not communicating. And so what did they do? They consolidated it.
The quote unquote reform, which in my mind it couldn't hurt, you know, was to consolidate the districts so they worked as one, even though there's no evidence that had anything to do with the flooding. And they decided to put engineers and hydrologists on the board, even though there's no evidence that the board had anything to do with the flooding. It would just seem like a good idea at the time. Right. So it got passed before the investigations were complete. and it was
for our
passed.
listeners who may not be familiar, like maybe explain the levy board and how that works.
Certainly. So a local levy board maintains completed levees. The Army Corps designs and builds, the local levy board maintains, and also raise money to pay our 30% of the building, and we pay all the maintenance. So there you have it. And there was this idea, without evidence, after the levees broke, that somehow the local levee districts were asleep at the wheel and not paying attention. Well, take it from me, no one told the Army Corps what to do. If the local levee districts had told the Corps, hey, your levees aren't going to work, they're going to break, the Corps would not have listened.
Right.
And they wouldn't have done that anyway. Before 2005, the Army Corps of Engineers was the premier engineering outfit in the world. 200 years experience, sterling reputation. These are the people that built tens of thousands of miles of levees along the Mississippi and Missouri, capable of withstanding 20 feet of storm surge every single year for 30 days or more.
Right.
Who would have thought the Army Corps can't build some flood walls on some drainage canals that only had to hold a couple of feet of water? Well, they fell over and broke. We all know that now. And we just got to make sure that doesn't happen again. But it was the Army Corps of Engineers' fault. They even admitted to it in their own investigation.
Well, as I recall, too, before Katrina, Katrina was not a surprise. It was unexpected, but not a surprise. We'd been talking about the fact that New Orleans was in a bowl and that there was always potential for failure. And it had been a discussion for probably 10 years before Katrina. It's just, the only people who were surprised were people who were not paying attention. I think the surprise is like, oh, shoot, that y'all said that would happen. That was unexpected. It's fascinating to me that how many people actually were asleep at the wheel.
Oh, well, I can answer that. So you're talking about Hurricane Pam, which was a test run for flooding, and that assumed 20 feet of water in the French Quarter and flooding in the city of New Orleans because of that bowl, except for one thing, it's impossible. The French Quarter is above sea level. It can't have 20 feet of water in it. So the experts who understand how this worked paid no attention to Hurricane Pam. As for what you said about people paying attention, yeah, we paid attention. That's why we all got out.
Right.
The reason we got out is because of there was also a 3-week or 5-week story by the Tyne-Picayune by Mark Schlefstein talking about the big one, should it come.
Right.
And it's because of that story that a lot of people, like my own family, said, we better get out.
Right.
But however, way too little attention was paid to the people without a car, credit cards, family outside of town, and road experience.
Sure.
And those are the people who didn't go out. And then of course, the elderly, of which I'm one now, and they are darn stubborn. You basically got to pick them up and carry them out.
Yeah, look, we had never evacuated before.
Right.
It was my first, right? To me, you only evacuated if you lived in like St. Bernard, right? Or maybe you're like in, Plaquemines Parish or something like that. And that's just how it was. I mean, you just would... To be fair, we just really hadn't had a major storm
in
either.
40
it
years.
It had been a long time. I mean, Andrew skirted, and it had already been weakened by Florida. So it had been a long stretch. And we talk about this too, because we do a lot of hurricane work. And the question's always going to be when there's another hurricane. And, in my office, like, well, but it was like Laura, it was Delta, and then it was Ida, and then the ones hitting Florida. I'm like, sure. But you're too young to remember, like Katrina didn't come off it did come off a string of storms, but there were a lot of misses, as I recall. It was like Ivan, Florida was getting pummeled, but we were fine, right? So
the evacuation of New Orleans ahead of Katrina was the most successful rapid evacuation of a metropolitan city in the history of the United States.
Right.
And it's kind of overlooked. Kathleen Blanco got a bad rap. She didn't get any credit for that. It was really her administration. And if it weren't for that and contraflow, a lot of people would have stayed home and perished with their pets.
It was like I don't know if you remember them scene Independence Day, right? And everyone's in traffic trying to get, because they decided at the last minute they're going to evacuate the cities. But of course you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. But Katrina, we weren't going to evacuate. And then I remember it was like, we're really late. Like everyone else has already got their hotel rooms and they're established. And,
Sunday morning.
I was just a dumb kid in law school. So I was supposed to be having a law school event at the Cat's Meow. And I was like, no, I'm not canceling that. I remember like everyone saying, you got to cancel it. I was like, why would I cancel it? It's just a hurricane. And then, when I stopped being a dumb kid and I realized that this was, something different, we left, but we were pretty late. And by that point, there was not a hotel room in sight. I mean, Baton Rouge was so overpopulated, you could maybe sleep in your car, but there'd be no place to park it, right? Lafayette, you could forget it. And Houston, Houston was out of hotel rooms. Everybody was gone. Texarkana, you could forget about it. So in a lot of ways, you're right. It's expensive to evacuate.
Yes.
Where are you going to go?
Yes.
My wife and I talk about this. She's not from here. She's from Indiana. And so we're blessed to have her here. And we talk about evacuating. And she says, well, because this year I was like, it snowed. Everyone should be on guard, right? I was like, I remember it snowed on like Christmas Day before Katrina. And I was like,
about 10 years ago.
Bad luck. I was like, that's bad luck. It doesn't snow like this in New Orleans. Everyone needs to be on high alert for like another Katrina style event. And I was like, we should talk about it now so we don't have to talk about it then. And she was like, well, I figured we would just do this, like go stay at my aunt's house. And I was like, what? I was like, you can't move our whole family into your aunt's house. And she's like, why not? I was like, because you're assuming you're only going to be there for 48 hours. I was like, you should be operating under the assumption that you're going to be somewhere for 2 to 6 weeks or more. I was like, look, for Katrina, I left. I didn't spend the night in my bed until mid-December. My apartment, I had an apartment on Magazine Street. It did not have water. It did not have electricity, and it didn't have it for a long time. It wasn't a blip, and your whole home generator, you can forget about it because there's no natural gas flowing out anyways. And so, we decided when we talked about this, in light of that we would just not talk about it anymore, and we'll figure it out when it comes. That was our big plan.
But you raised a good point. After the storm and after the flooding, and a lot of people perished, the question was, well, why didn't you just leave? Oh, just leave. Well, and evacuations are dangerous. Remember Houston?
Took us 12 hours to get to Houston. A 5-hour drive or a 6-hour drive, I suppose. It took us 12 hours. And if you don't have money, so we saw this from Ike. Ike was another, kind of good example where Houston had waited way too long to call the evacuation.
For Hurricane Rita. And to remind your listeners, an entire busload of elderly people exploded because of the gas tanks. It was rushed. They didn't have a plan, and they were ordered to move out, and it was horrific.
Yeah.
The evacuation of Houston ahead of Hurricane Rita.
People had to abandon their cars on the interstate,
yes,
right?
Yes.
It's exactly what you would expect it to look like in this apocalyptic way of like, everyone's got to get out. It doesn't work that way. And it's expensive, and you don't have food, and you don't have money for gas, and maybe you have a car, but if you don't have money, you can't. I think I was reading again about General Honore and kind of what getting the buses, and again, reliving those thoughts of like finally somebody in here that can like take charge and help some of these people out that had been very easily labeled as, oh, it's just criminals. These are just, these are just, hardened criminals and violent people. And
if you're
and
still
so we'll
here.
just forget about them. But they weren't. They're just people who didn't have the means to pick up and leave.
The credit cards. And there's one other thing about evacuations that is rarely discussed. They're stressful. There are how many hurricanes, I've lost count, where you just think of, should I go? Should I stay? Should I leave? This is all incredibly stressful.
So I always say it as a joke, but I'm terrible at this. When Ida came, the question was going to be whether or not we stayed or we left. And I really didn't know the answer, but I did know that I hated having evacuated for Katrina because I couldn't get back. I left like an idiot. Like I took my laptop and not my power cord. Like I left with like one pair of shoes, because in my mind, I was going to be back tomorrow, right? This was a nothing. This was insignificant. And if the levees had held, who knows? Maybe I would have been back, in a few days.
You and I would never have met.
Right. So, but so Ida's coming and my wife's like, I think we should go. And I was like, listen, I don't want to be stranded somewhere for weeks and weeks on end. My business is here, my home is here. And then then sure enough, just like Katrina, like I turn on the TV and I'm watching. It's like 3:00 in the morning. I can't sleep. I don't, and I was going to say Bob Breck, but it probably wasn't. He wouldn't have done the 3 a.m. And they're showing this thing and it is churning in the Gulf. And I remember like, Justin, your kids are, like 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, whatever age they were then. And I was like, this is stupid. If you want to stay, that's one thing, but it's crazy to have your kids stay. And so I went and I woke up my wife at like 3:30 in the morning. And she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I changed my mind. She's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Because we had debated this to death, where Lindsay was finally just like, oh, whatever. I'm just going to follow your lead, because you're the veteran. And that meant we had about 90 minutes to get the hell out of here. Like we weren't prepared. Like there's food in the freezer in the garage. Like, I mean, so I had already been through all these hurricanes and I still did it. But it's, it's not easy. It's not as easy. And I had a place to go, right? It was with my family, which
smart.
is why I was, like, well, I don't want to go with my whole extended family. Are you kidding me? I'd rather, perish in this hurricane. So
see how difficult it is. And you're an intelligent guy. And still you made all the stupid mistakes.
All the same mistakes everyone else
offense.
makes. No. Stupid mistakes. And I had the ability to handle it, I had money for gas and I had a car big enough for my family and a support system of a place to go. But you shouldn't have to be like a top 1%, right, to weather a storm, right? I mean, everybody should be able to like have a hurricane and then live to see the next day. And they don't, right?
Right.
And they still don't, Right. And so a frequent question I get asked is, about shelters, shelters of last resort. And they're like, well, it just depends. I mean, sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. I was like, I don't know that New Orleans would do it again.
No, they won't.
I don't think they would either.
What's becoming more popular, and this has happened after all these hurricanes we've had, is people are creating safe houses. So for example, I'm going to give my home as an example. We have Tesla batteries that store solar power. And they have enough power in them to power the refrigerator, the freezer, and one bedroom and bath for AC indefinitely, for as long as needed. And of course, I wouldn't want to live in there forever.
Yeah,
but you I can go in there, and after the winds die down, go out and see how bad it is. If it's too bad, get in the car and leave. Otherwise, you can stay and they'll have the electricity back on.
At least you'll have.
So, and notice that it's solar powered, so there's not a generator, it's not dangerous.
Right.
And there are more and more of these all over the city. More and more people have generators now. So more and more people are doing something called shelter in place, which is safer.
So we have a whole home generator. But, if it's a major storm, you won't have the natural gas to support the generator. That's always my concern. So it's like
solar power.
Yeah, I don't have the solar power. I should have, I wish. We were building, so I couldn't have afforded, anything else at that point. I was like, nothing else. Forget the levers on the toilet.
No woodwork.
We'll figure it out when we get there.
No plumbing.
Yeah, right. We were done at that point. But they were like, Tesla's like, well, we make roof tiles.
Yes.
I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. But I think we all know, like, that's way out of our range.
They're expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, well, I see you have this book. So, Words Whispered in the Water. Talk to me about this.
Sure. This is a special anniversary edition of my 2020 book.
Okay.
We talk about not only why the levees failed, but who's responsible and how the Army Corps of Engineers tried to cover up its mistakes. Okay. And spent a lot of money trying to make that happen. But we caught them, and that's what this book is about. I also want to bring it to your listeners' attention, something I just found out. I'm in a major focus in a documentary that just got released. It is called Leading Ladies of Hurricane Katrina.
Okay.
It is currently being screened. The author is Lloyd Anderson. It's great. It's only 29 minutes long. It also features Kathleen Blanco. And those electrical boxes all over town that are painted?
Yes, I love it.
The woman who came up with that idea is featured in this, and also it highlights a woman from Waveland, Mississippi, who created a museum. So it's not just about New Orleans. And if I may plug this, since I had nothing to do with creating this documentary, I didn't even know about it until I saw it a few weeks ago. It is being screened at the Broad October 19th at 3:00, free charge.
Okay. Well, we'll have this out before then, hopefully, huh? Yeah. And so October 19th at the Broad,
Leading ladies of Hurricane Katrina.
You talk about those electrical boxes, and that's there were some silver linings after Katrina. There were some happy moments, some small victories. That's a good example of one. Small little things that kind of brighten up the city. A lot of it was just the emotional connection that people had. I remember driving by Commander's Palace, and they had this huge sign up that said, we know what it means, and kind of getting choked up, right? Because it was so traumatic for us to have this diaspora and confusion and fear as to what was next. But people like you, who stepped up to say, well, no, we're going to rebuild. We're not going to lay down. We're not just going to give up. But we're going to affect change while we do it, or we can, something as small as painting an electrical box that kind of beautifies the neighborhood and gives people pride again and kind of in their hometown. And it affects a feeling, an emotion. And even if people aren't aware of it, even if they're not thinking about it, they're reaping the benefit of it every time they pass by it. But I think it's just a small example of what a little tiny thing that can make people feel great.
After Katrina and after the levees breached, neighborhoods were already close, but now they're even closer. The city of New Orleans is known as the checkerboard city. Right. I mean, it's not like one whole region is one color and another whole region is another. It's checkerboard. And it's always been that way in my 45 years living here. But after the levees broke, neighborhoods got even closer. Neighbors got closer.
Right.
Neighbors who barely talked to their neighbors suddenly got chummy.
Yeah.
And that's what losing everything will do to you.
Right. I mean, look, I always say I'm a terrible neighbor. I'm like, I'm no good because I'm all caught up in my own world. But if you are a terrible neighbor, and a major event happens, you're really kind of left on your own, right? Without a neighbor, you're all on an island. And so I often sort of say, like, we really should be better humans than this. I should really go meet my neighbors. And we see each other and we wave.
Get a dog.
I know. Don't tell my kids that.
Okay.
We're going to edit that out. No, I'm kidding. My kids are dying.
Well, wait till one of them's old enough to feed it and walk
Right,
it.
exactly. Like, I'm not, my 8-year-old's like, can we have a dog? And then we'll go to his grandparents, my parents' house. They have a dog and they're like, oh, it's looking at me. And I was like, and that's why you don't get to have a dog. Well, hey, look, they're telling us that we got to wrap up, but thank you so much for coming. Sandy Rosenthal, levees.org. There's a lot of things here. So Words Whispered in Water. You're the author of this. I'm excited to read that and check that out. And then, of course, Leading Ladies After, I'm going to mess it up again. I can't do it.
Leading Ladies of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah. So, well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for stepping up. And coming out to the Bell, so usually we're sitting in like my really cold, sterile conference room. But here we're at the Bell, this beautiful sort of pub, restaurant that just opened on Esplanade. And so, we're going to go pour a pint after this. I'm super excited. We're going to get a tutorial on what the perfect pint is. And then hopefully I'll get to drink it afterwards. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on and everything that you've done for us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today on Above the Legal Limit. If you enjoyed the show and you want to hear more about business and law, hit that subscribe button. If you didn't like the show, keep it to yourself. Remember, there's no limit to what we can achieve. We will see you next week. Until then, even though we're above the legal limit, let's drive safely. Cheers, everyone.